dealing with project progress and performance measurement and evaluation. The Chapter 13 quote starts out, how does a project get 1 year late? Well, it gets late 1 day at a time. And it gets down into what one of the major jobs of a project manager is evaluation and control of the project, understanding where the project's at, controlling the project, all the project parameters, project resources, project accounting, project financial goals, and making sure along the way that things are running well. And so in this chapter, we're going to focus mostly on how to take a look at the numbers that the project generates and understand what's going on with the project. In very small projects, and when you have 1 or 2 projects, maybe the conventional techniques of just being involved in the project, being in the project, wandering around when the project's underway might be enough. But for larger projects and for those that are managing multiple projects, you really need to take a look at what's going on with all the numbers. And so although our financial controls in the most cases for most companies are well understood and well protected and well managed, the rest of project management control is sometimes left in more of a hodgepodge situation. So the reality is, for effective control, a project manager needs a single source of information that they can use to collect all the data, and then from that data report on what's going on in the project. So we'll make the assumption that that's all underway and in place. The reality in most workforces is a lot of times you're going from system to system to collect the information you need to really understand what's going on with your project. But that being said, let's take a look at what the ideal situations are in getting the information you need to evaluate your project. Before we get too deep into some of the project parameters that we'll be looking at, let's take a look at the overall project progress report format. Most of your report formats, and if you're doing this for any of the exercises that we're involved in, you might want to consider whether this is the way to go, whether it's for the case or for the simulation experiential exercise. But the first thing you want to indicate is what's going on since the last report. So progress reports are assumed to be something you're going to do regularly throughout the project. And so the first thing you want to do is report on what's been happening since the last report. No sense in going all the way back to the beginning. Some of the very typical things you'd want to include are things like the schedule, cost, and scope. What's the status of those within the project? If there's any cumulative trends going on, things that are worthy of note to upper management, and also then those problems and issues that have come up since the last report, any action items, resolutions, variances, those sorts of things, and then any corrective action plans for those things that need corrective action. We'll see this report again near the end of this presentation, but just take a look at this slide right now. It's a typical report format. You see that in the upper right-hand corner, project managers identified in the upper left, some information about the project status, where it sits in the priority of projects, maybe some identification number, and then you're seeing an alphabet soup of data, PV, EV, AC. We're going to learn what those terms are, of course, in this lecture, but just for one that's I think worth pointing out now, and it's going to pop up, I've actually circled this SV of negative 22,176 and circled the second line about the project status that indicates the project is 25 days behind schedule. Well, wouldn't you know, the SV is the schedule variance, but what you're seeing up there is a dollar amount. So it's the dollars of work that has been planned to be done that hasn't been done yet. There is no direct correlation that you can tie in with the dollars to the days. The days are determined by looking at the Gantt chart and other things on schedule. Fortunately, when we use Microsoft Project, you'll see that you can get some approximate days for the lateness of the project based on that information, and we'll have you take a look at that when you look at some of the MS Project videos. In my introduction to this chapter, I talked about having a control process in place, And it's an overall process, an information system. It's a way of managing projects that really we're talking about here, but we're going to focus in on getting the details of the project statistics. So in this particular case, we're talking about comparing the performance of the project against any of those deviations, and from those deviations evaluate what course of action to take to get the project back on track. So the first thing you need to do is set a baseline plan. And if you remember back from Chapter 8, when we talked about assigning resources, the last exercise we talked about was establishing a baseline budget. And so that baseline budget forms the planned value for the overall project. And then we're going to measure our progress as the project goes along and see how well we're doing against that baseline. And then where we're off and where we're behind, we're going to need to take some action to do that. And so to understand what's going on, the first thing we'll want to take a look at some of the tools. And you have these tools available within Microsoft Project. And if you're running your projects in some information system, you'd have something like this. So let's take a look at these examples. In this figure, in the upper slide, you can see the baseline Gantt chart being represented. And so if you went and turned on the tracking function within Microsoft Project or looked at the progress of your project in the Sim project, you could turn this on and see where your baseline is and what's going on with your project against the baseline. So in the first baseline, Gantt chart shows what's going on, and then if you invoke the tracking feature within Microsoft Project, you could see progress to date. And at any point, you just set the date that you want to take a look at the progress. And from that, you can see what work's been done, what work has been estimated that needs to be done, and based on that estimate, where the project ultimately will be completed. And you can see that represented by the solid pink line and then that cross-hatched clear white line. When we initially set our budget in place, we come up with a time phase baseline plan. And by doing this, we allow for some of the typical problems that come up if we just linearize or somehow apportion our costs that aren't in line with the actual deployment of the resources. And that way we can actually use the financial measures as an indication of whether we're ahead or behind on schedule. And that coupled along with some type of a way of scheduling our costs that we incur, whether it's an earned value system of some sort or a methodology we have in place for accepting costs as they're incurred, that will allow us then to really see what's going on with the project, checking progress of the project on a financial basis on real terms. In order to do this, we need to first understand the things that we'll need to be measuring and collecting as part of the data collection process. And so let's take a look at some of these in more detail. The first thing we need to know is the earned value. And the earned value for the test is simply the percent complete times its original budget. So what we'll do is we'll, from the field, get an indication on how much of the project activity has been done, and then based on the total value for that activity, or the total planned value, if you will, times the percent complete, we'll figure out from that how much we've earned, how much of the project value we've earned on that activity. The planned value is the time phase baseline of the value of the work scheduled. And so in this particular case, if we have a 4-day duration activity, that's $400, and we were going to deploy that on $100 per day on a $100 per day basis, the planned value after 2 days would be $200. Now its earned value would be based on how much of that work's been done. AC is the actual cost of the work complete. I think that's pretty obvious. So those are the three parameters, and notice that we're getting those three from three different sources. The earned value is coming from a report out of the field or through some earned value set of rules based on the percent of the work that's been completed on an activity. The planned value is off your baseline budget, and it's based on where you're at in time, at that point in time in the plan. And then your actual cost is what's been billed to the account numbers through your accounting and financial system, really coming from a third independent source. So given those 3 data points, we can calculate things like the cost variance, the schedule variance, the budgeted cost